Welcome to Surrender School, Emotional Sobriety Workshop. Chapter 11, Breaking the Bonds of Perfectionism.
Welcome back. Thank you all for coming. Okay, so this chapter was chapter 11, Breaking the Bonds of Perfectionism. And I know we're not supposed to take anything personally, but this chapter was all about me. So I'm going to start on page 205. And Dr. Berger says that perfectionism is as much of a threat to our emotional sobriety as emotional dependency. And that's a powerful statement. I can see the emotional dependency stuff because it's so out, we're casting our net out there. But with perfectionism, we think, well, we're only torturing ourselves, right? But as you can see, as we go through this chapter, that's not really the case. He says in another powerful statement that perfectionism is self-centered. I'm going to say that again. Perfectionism is self-centered. Can you see how when you are being perfectionistic, all you are concerned with is yourself, your performance, okay? So we can dress it up like I want to be the perfect mother, or I want to be the perfect spouse, or I want to be the perfect employee. But it's really not necessary. It's not for the other person. It's for us, and it's about us. We want to get something through our perfectionism. So on a few pages later on 208, Dr. Berger tells us that problems in relationships are caused by both of the people in it. The problem between two people is not the problem. This is a theme of his. The problem between two people is not the problem. It's how they're coping with the problem that's happening between them that causes the real problem. The next page, he reminds us that we are driven to be perfect due to our fear and anxiety that if we're not perfect, then we won't be loved, accepted, or belong. That is so my story. I honestly thought that if I could be the perfect little girl, that my parents would love me more. I really thought that all of my other problems would go away if I could just perform perfectly. If I could just be perfect. And that all of my problems not only would go away, but they would go away forever. And I wouldn't have them ever again. And I would, as we say, arrive, right? And I don't understand the process, or I don't know how this happened, but all of that kind of got funneled down into my weight and my body and my appearance. And it became really consolidated down to, if I can just get to my goal weight, everything will be perfect. If I can just get to my goal weight, I'll truly be loved and I won't ever be abandoned. If I can just look this way physically, then I'll be loved, accepted, and belong. And I don't know what the process was. Maybe you guys have more insight into that, into your own process on that, but I don't know how it wound up getting funneled down to the body, but it really did. And I have to tell you, it was funneled down to my looks and my body and my weight by the time I was 10. I remember distinctly when I was 10, my parents promised me that if I would lose weight, they would let me get my ears pierced. And I wanted that more than anything in the world. But of course, I couldn't do it. I'm food addict. I'm a compulsive overeater. I couldn't do it. I couldn't control my food. So needless to say, I didn't get my ears pierced until I was 13, but when. Okay, so on page 210, Dr. Berger quotes Dr. Jerry Greenwald, as saying that not all giving is truly generous. Sometimes we give to take, and this kind of giving is a manipulation. He says a phony relationship of mutual manipulation usually happens when two people relate to each other primarily based on each other's expectations. And it's the classic example of a romantic relationship where, you know, the wife responds and reacts and interacts with the husband the way that she thinks the husband should be and the way that she thinks a wife should be, and vice versa. And I know my ex and I did this dance all the time. I had no idea who I was at the time. I was much younger than I am now. And all I had to go by was what I thought a wife should be and what I thought a husband should be and how I thought their relationship should be. And it's really all I had. But it wasn't really interacting based on who we really were as people. I mean, if I'm interacting with my husband based on how I think things should be, you know, he could be replaced with anybody. It wouldn't matter who he really is as a person. It's who he should be and who I should be in response, right? And all of that is just like pieces on the chessboard. It's all just manipulation. He says it is common to take responsibility for your partner's feelings when you are emotionally immature. But when you add perfectionism to this mix, you've really got a serious problem, because then you're required to do a perfect job managing your partner's feelings and emotions. And that's really what the whole situation was in the example he gave about Maria and Judy's relationship. And I know that has been true for me. Early in my relationship with my wife, we've been together about 30 years. And early in the relationship, she's just not a talker, and I'm a talker. Whenever she was quiet, I would think, what's wrong? What's going on in her head? She's not happy. I have to make sure she's happy, and that whole ridiculousness dance. And it was about making sure the relationship was perfect and everything was going to be perfect. Okay, so on page 211, he says that perfectionism creates a part of ourselves called the top dog bully. That's what he called it, the top dog bully. I just call it the bully. I've heard it referred to as the judge. I've heard it referred to as the critical parent. I've heard it referred to as the parasite. And it's this part of us that is absolutely authoritarian and very punitive. And the bully believes that it is always right. And it shoulds all over us, and it can be very verbally abusive, and it can even make us hurt ourselves physically. And I can say I did that I have done that with exercise before. So it's this insanely critical voice inside our heads. And this is the thing that demands our perfection, right? This voice back here. I got 97 on a test, and the little voice says, what happened to the other 3 points, right? So some people have a committee, that itty bitty shitty committee that people talk about, but mine tends to just be one nasty, nasty, punitive, verbally abusive voice in my head. On page 212, Dr. Berger says the bully manipulates others to get what it needs in the same way it manipulates us. So and that's kind of interesting. And I think we do that by being critical of others or being judgmental of others. We have this bully in our head that is critical and judgmental of us, but it's also critical and judgmental of those outside of us. And it manipulates them and tries to get what it wants from them by being critical or judgmental or sarcastic or maybe a little side comment here or there, or an eyebrow raise, or maybe an eye roll, okay? The bully manipulates us with demands of perfection and threats of future catastrophe if we aren't perfect. I used to get a lot of anxiety from not being able to be perfect or thinking that I needed to be perfect. I had a tremendous amount of anxiety because there was just this feeling of impending doom or catastrophe, or something really bad is going to happen if I can't pull this off perfectly. That's a crappy way to live. The bully requires us to control people and events around us. This bully wants you to be perfect, and it wants everything around it to be perfect. Our bully also demands that life conform to all of its expectations. There's that E word again, with expectations. Now on page 213, Dr. Berger says that perfectionism tells us we must do things perfectly, others should do things perfectly, and that life should be perfect. Life must fulfill our expectations, or we're going to have that catastrophe, right? So perfectionism is the relentless drive toward an unrealistic, inhuman, and unattainable goal. Now, I don't know about you, but that describes my relationship with my food plan, with my abstinence, with my body, and with my program. And it kept me from being able to be in recovery. It started out by, I was able to get a little bit of recovery, and then the relentless perfectionism would prevent me from staying in recovery because I couldn't do it perfect. And then as my disease progressed, I couldn't even get into recovery. I couldn't even string a few days of abstinence together, because by 9 a.m. I would have already eaten something, and then, Katie bar the door, everything's up for eating. So perfectionism is so intricately linked with my disease and my weight and my food plan and my abstinence and everything else. And I really had to work hard in program through the steps to take those things apart, to pull that apart so that I no longer had an expectation of perfectionism. I mean, I will not cut a blueberry in half to make sure that it weighs exactly whatever, my fruit is supposed to weigh. I refuse to do that today. I refuse to have that level of perfectionism because it's impossible to sustain. It just is. And it guarantees my relapse. I am guaranteeing my relapse when I do that. I am setting myself up for relapse. I just know that. I've done it. I've probably done it hundreds of times over the last, 45 years. Oh, more than that. Almost 50. Ooh, more than that. 51 years of my disease. Ooh, I'm getting older. Okay, so page 214. So how did we become perfectionists? And he takes a stab at that. I think that's a very complicated question, quite frankly, how we become perfectionists. I think it's very, very complicated because it not only comes from, maybe your parents, maybe it comes from your peers, maybe it comes from your culture, your religious background, your subculture, your government, your whatever, because there are a lot of influences on us that way. So I think the developing perfectionism is kind of tricky because I think it's very complicated. I will say that unfortunately, I have found in my life, particularly in the work setting, that perfectionism is rewarded. It is rewarded. I got rewarded for my perfectionism at work. And that makes it all the much harder to let go of it when you're being rewarded for it, right? Okay, so this is what he says. Dr. Berger reminds us again that our childhood anxiety drove us to search for a solution for it, right? And so we developed our false self that was an idealized, perfect version of ourselves that we thought would make us secure, make us love, make us accepted, make us belong. Okay. But because it was false, it was impossible to live up to. And he says here, our true nature is always rebelling against the prison of the false self. And, when I think about my own experiences with that, I wasn't necessarily rebelling against the false self. I just simply wasn't able to live up to it. I I wasn't rebelling. I wanted to be perfect. I wanted to live up to all these shoulds and all these expectations, but I simply couldn't do it. He also says that the fact that we can't live up to it causes us a lot of fear and stress. So we keep trying even harder to perfectly fulfill the should demands of our false self so that we can feel okay and safe. And I don't know about you, but I did that with program and abstinence in my food plan. I would have this insanely detailed, impossibly perfectionistic kind of food plan, and I would fail. And then I would pull myself up by the bootstraps and I would try all the more harder, and then I would fail again. And I would do this cycle over and over and over again. Um, and it was absolutely crazy making. It was absolutely crazy making. And it ensured my relapse because really the only way that I have ever known prior to the program to get away from all this anxiety, all this fear, all this crap was to eat. That's all I've ever known. And so it's a really nasty cycle that I played into for decades. On page 215, he talks about, okay, so how do we cope with perfectionism? And he tells us that striving for perfect adherence to anything will interfere with our emotional sobriety. He says we should never fool ourselves into thinking we can achieve perfection because being perfect is impossible. Just by definition of perfect and ideal, that is something out there. We strive toward it, but we never achieve it. So by definition, perfection and an ideal are they can't be met by humans anyway. And he says we must let go of this expectation and accept that perfection actually isn't the answer to our anxiety and life problems. And program tells us that the answer to our anxiety and our fears is a spiritual awakening. That's what program tells us, that our spirituality, our spiritual awakening, our spiritual growth and continued growth is what is actually the answer to our problems. Not only food, body, appearance, but everything else as well is that spiritual awakening and that spiritual connection to our higher power. That's all I've got today. So I'm ready to do discussion questions.
See you next week.